In the heart of Abuja, Nigeria's capital, the morning sun spilled gold across the polished glass of the International Conference Center. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Delegates in tailored suits and colorful robes moved through the grand hall, their murmurs blending with the sound of clicking cameras and rustling notes. This wasn't just another summit. This was the moment West Africa would confront its economic destiny. All eyes were on one man, Bola Tinubu, a seasoned leader with decades of experience. Tinubu was respected for his sharp mind and no-nonsense style. Today, though, something was different. He stood by the podium in silence, gazing across the room with a furrowed brow, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. For a man known for control, he looked unusually tense, as if he sensed that what was about to unfold would go far beyond protocol. Across the hall, another presence drew attention not because of age or history, but because of sheer confidence. Ibrahim Traoré, the young and bold leader from Burkina Faso, stood tall, his posture firm, his expression unreadable. He was the talk of the conference for one reason: his radical economic policy. He had pushed forward a nationalist agenda that reduced reliance on foreign corporations and prioritized internal development. To some, it was visionary. To others, dangerous. But Traoré didn't seem worried. In fact, as he locked eyes with Tinubu from across the room, there was the faintest trace of a smile, cool, calm, and utterly unshaken. The rumors had been swirling for days. Tinubu planned to publicly criticize Traoré's approach. Many expected sparks. Few expected fire. Amina Sow, Tinubu's closest economic advisor, leaned in. "Stay calm," she whispered. He gave the smallest nod, but his eyes never left Traoré. On the opposite side, Kalilou Diallo, Burkina Faso's foreign affairs minister, stood close to Traoré, a veteran of diplomacy. Diallo adjusted his glasses and murmured, "We're ready for anything." Traoré didn't respond. He just kept watching. And watching him was Chidi Okoro, a respected journalist known for his piercing political analysis. Chidi had been covering African politics for 2 decades. But this moment felt different. In his gut, he knew this wasn't just about policy. This was generational. 2 visions of progress. 2 different paths for a continent seeking to define its future. He adjusted the mic clip to his lapel and whispered to himself, "This is history in real time." Then, the lights dimmed. The moderator walked onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "welcome to the opening session." A hushed silence swept over the crowd. The clash hadn't begun, but the room knew it was coming. And no one, not even Tinubu or Traoré, could predict what would happen next. Bola Tinubu rose from his seat, buttoned his jacket, and walked steadily toward the podium. The hall was still, every breath held. The spotlight washed over his weathered face as he adjusted the mic. He offered a cordial smile, greeted the delegates, and began with a message of unity. "West Africa must walk together," he said, his voice deep and assured. "Our strength lies in collaboration." A polite round of applause followed. But everyone knew the real speech hadn't started. And then, it did. Tinubu's eyes shifted toward Ibrahim Traoré. His tone sharpened, his words deliberate. "But we must also ask," he said, pausing just enough for the silence to press in. whether recent economic decisions from some of our neighbors truly lead us forward or risk isolating us from progress. The words landed like a stone in still water. Everyone turned to look at Traoré. He didn't blink. From across the room, Amina Sow leaned forward. Watching both men, she had written parts of this speech, but even she hadn't expected Tinubu to be this direct. She could feel the temperature rising, and the session had only just begun. Kalilou Diallo, standing beside Traoré, clenched his jaw. "They're calling us out," he muttered. Traoré remained seated, calm, but his hand gently tapped the armrest once. Then again. That was the only sign of the fire building inside. Tinubu continued. "Protectionist policies may offer short-term comfort," Ed declared. "But in the long term, they starve us of partnership, innovation, and scale. No nation can thrive behind a locked door." There was no applause now, just silence. Traoré stood. He walked to the microphone with the precision of a man who had rehearsed this in his mind 1,000 times. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush. But each word cut through the air like wind against steel. "Mr. President," he began, locking eyes with Tinubu, "I understand your concerns. But let me be clear, Burkina Faso is not closing its doors. We are building our house before we invite guests." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "We are not rejecting cooperation." Traoré continued. "We are redefining it. Our people deserve the first fruits of our land. That is not regression. That is responsibility." Tinubu frowned. He leaned toward Amina and whispered, "He's dressing nationalism up as progress." She nodded slowly but kept her eyes on Traoré. Because whatever it was rhetoric or reality, he was commanding the room. Chidi Okoro scribbled furiously in his notepad. "This is no longer a debate," he thought. "It's a collision." Suddenly, Kalilou Diallo stood up and addressed the room. His tone diplomatic but unwavering. "Our position is not anti-trade," he said. "It's pro-people. We are investing in ourselves first because we've learned what happens when we don't." The moderator glanced at his notes nervously. This wasn't going the way anyone expected. The tension was becoming tangible, sharp enough to cut. Tinubu returned to the mic, his voice firmer. "If we retreat inward, we risk turning this continent into a patchwork of fences," he warned. "Integration is not just wise, it's necessary." He paused, scanning the audience, as if daring someone to disagree. And Traoré did. "History," he said, rising again, "teaches us that depending blindly on others leads to exploitation. We've seen it. We've lived it. What we're doing isn't rejection, it's reflection." A beat of silence. "Maybe," Traoré added, his gaze steady. "It's time for others to reconsider their own dependencies." 2. That line cracked the room open. Some delegates clapped. Others stiffened. A few glanced nervously toward their leaders. The moderator stepped in, voice tight. "We'll now break for lunch and reconvene in 1 hour." But the energy had already shifted. The room buzzed as small groups broke off, analyzing every word, every look, every pause. Backstage, Amina approached Tinubu. "We may need a softer strategy," she advised. "He has the room." And the headlines. Tinubu looked away, silent. Meanwhile, Diallo whispered to Traoré, "You've struck a nerve." Traoré didn't smile. Good, he said, because that's where change begins. Chidi Okoro stood in the hallway, recording his closing line into a voice memo. This isn't just two leaders debating trade. This is two eras meeting head-on. The conference resumed after the break. But something had changed. Gone was the polished small talk. The chatter had turned serious. Hushed. Calculated. Delegates returned to their seats like spectators re-entering an arena after a first-round draw, knowing round two would hit harder. Traoré and Tinubu both sat at opposite ends of the long table, their faces calm, their minds anything but. Amina leaned over and whispered to Tinubu, "Sir, he's not just popular. He's persuasive. If we escalate, we lose the middle." Tinubu didn't respond. He was watching Traoré. Across the room, Traoré was in quiet conversation with Kalilou Diallo. "He's trying to rattle us," Traoré said. "But we hold the line. Let our ideas do the talking." Diallo nodded. "Just remember, this isn't only about the leaders in the room. The world is watching." The moderator stepped forward again, clearing his throat. "We'll now begin the second session. The floor is open to questions from the audience." A young woman stood. Her voice, though soft, sliced through the tension. "My name is Alea from the University of Dakar." She began. "How do you plan to balance national growth with global collaboration? Can sovereignty and partnership exist together? A perfect question." Tinubu stood first. His tone was more tempered now, but the force of his conviction remained. "We must build bridges, not barriers," he said. "Partnerships, when wisely chosen, are not threats, they're multipliers. We've tried isolation before. It leads nowhere." His words hung in the air, reasonable, practiced, safe. Then Traoré stood. He didn't walk to the mic. He stayed where he was, speaking from his seat, voice low and strong. "We're not isolating," he said. "We're prioritizing. The order matters." He paused, letting the weight of that phrase linger. You can't invite the world into a house still under construction. Our people deserve floors that don't collapse beneath them. A wave of applause rippled through the room. Amina took a slow breath. This wasn't just a rebuttal, it was resonance. Emotional, principled, human. But Tinubu wasn't done. He rose again, the fire back in his chest. "Emotion doesn't feed nations," he said, eyes fixed on Traoré. "Plans do. Budgets do. Trade does." A few claps, a few nods, but less than before. Kalilou Diallo took the mic next. "With respect," he said gently, "our emotion is not weakness. It's vision. The kind that built every great nation from the ground up." Chidi Okoro, recording every breath of this exchange, whispered into his mic, "This is no longer debate. This is ideology on trial." The moderator intervened again, sensing the mood reaching a boiling point. "Each leader will now deliver a closing message before we conclude today's session." Tinubu walked slowly to the podium, each step measured. He took a breath and looked across the room. "We are not enemies in this room," he said. "We want the same thing: growth, dignity, strength. But I urge caution. Going it alone feels brave until the bridge burns behind you." It was thoughtful, sincere, but it didn't ignite. Then Traoré stood. He didn't walk. He didn't pause. Mr. President, he said clearly. You speak of bridges, but we know many bridges in Africa were built to carry wealth out, not bring hope in. The room fell silent. Burkina Faso is not shutting the world out. We are shutting out exploitation, and we are inviting our people in. A single clap, then another, then dozens. The applause grew louder, not wild, but steady, intentional. Amina closed her notebook. Tinubu exhaled slowly. Traoré sat down, his face unreadable. But Dilo smiled, just slightly, because the tide had turned and everyone knew it. The applause slowly faded, but the atmosphere didn't relax. If anything, the silence that followed Traoré's final line felt louder than the claps. Tinubu sat motionless. He wasn't angry, he was calculating. Amina leaned in. That landed harder than we expected. He nodded slowly. His eyes were still on Traoré, but his mind was elsewhere now. Not on winning, on adapting. On the other side of the room, Traoré remained still, hands folded in front of him. He had spoken from the heart. Now, he waited. The moderator approached the center once again, this time with less formality. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, we are proposing an unscheduled working session, a closed-door roundtable. Between both delegations, murmurs broke out instantly. It was unconventional, but it was needed. Tinubu didn't hesitate. He stood and extended his hand toward Traoré. It was firm, not forced. Traoré stood and took it without a word. Cameras flashed like fireworks, but neither man smiled. The gesture wasn't about theatrics. It was about movement. Behind closed doors, the energy shifted again. Gone were the speeches. This was negotiation. The Nigerian delegation outlined key infrastructure projects that could support regional trade rail lines, data hubs, energy corridors. Burkina Faso's team countered with proposals that emphasized local ownership, job creation, and fair revenue distribution. There were disagreements plenty, but now they came with proposals, not posturing. At the center of it all were two men, older and younger, different in tone, but similar in one vital way. Neither wanted to walk away with nothing. Amina Sow quietly handed Tinubu a folded note. It read, "Shared leadership is still leadership." He tapped his finger on the words for a moment, then looked up. "I believe," he said slowly, "we can protect national dignity while expanding our reach if both sides stay honest." Traoré nodded. "And if both sides respect limits, the world doesn't get to write our future for us." The discussions continued into the early evening. Some moments were tense, others surprisingly warm. And then clarity. A set of principles emerged, a co-developed investment fund, protections for local industries, shared data access, and a rotating council to oversee ethical trade practices. It wasn't a perfect deal, but it was real. The delegations returned to the main hall together. This time, the applause was spontaneous. Tinubu took the stage first. "We have found a path forward," he said. Voice clearer now. "A path that includes strength and sovereignty, strategy and spirit." Traoré followed. "This is not a compromise of vision," he told the room. "It is a confirmation of values and a commitment to our people." The applause returned stronger this time. In the back of the room, Chidi Okoro stood frozen for a moment. Then he pressed record. "This is the headline," he whispered. "They didn't break each other. They bridged the future." Backstage, Amina approached Tinubu. He looked more relaxed than he had in days. "You handled that well," she said. He smiled. "Just barely. He's not the opponent I expected," he admitted. "He's the kind of leader this region will need, long after I'm gone." Across the hallway, Khalilou Diallo patted Traoré on the shoulder. "You held your ground," he said. Traoré replied, "And I made a way for others to stand." 2. It wasn't victory. It wasn't surrender. It was evolution in real time. In the days that followed, the headlines told a story no one had expected. From tension to triumph, two leaders reshape West Africa's future. Tinubu and Traoré find common ground against all odds. History was written in Abuja. Across the region, television anchors replayed the moment that Tinubu and Traoré shook hands. Social media lit up with clips of Traoré's line, "We are not shutting the world out. We are shutting out exploitation." The words were being quoted in classrooms, offices, and town halls. It was no longer just a political summit. It had become a symbol. Chidi Okoro sat at his desk, staring at a blinking cursor. For once, words didn't come easily. He had covered dozens of high-stakes events, but this one felt different. This wasn't just about trade. He finally typed. It was about legacy. About what happens when leaders stop defending their egos and start defending their people. In Abuja, Tinubu was back in his private office, reviewing the final version of the agreement with Amina Sow. It was cleaner than anyone had imagined. Joint infrastructure investments, regional protections for local industries, rotating oversight councils to ensure fairness. But there was something else. 2. Something unwritten. Mutual respect. Amina poured a cup of tea and slid it toward her president. "You did something most don't," she said. Tinubu looked up, eyebrow raised. "You listened," she finished. He didn't smile, but there was a lightness to him now. "He's young," Tinubu murmured, referring to Traoré. "But he's not reckless. He reminds me of what I used to sound like before politics became a business." Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, Traoré was back among the people. He didn't hold a press conference. He didn't make a victory speech. He simply walked the streets shaking hands, exchanging words, listening. The people didn't cheer like it was a show. They greeted him like he was one of them. Because he was. Khalilou Diallo walked beside him. "You've done what few expected," Diallo said. "You stared down a legacy and didn't flinch." Traoré paused in front of a small food vendor and bought a bag of roasted peanuts. "I didn't come to flinch," he said. "I came to build. And that takes longer, but it lasts longer." 2. Back at the National Square, a young boy ran up to him and handed him a hand-drawn picture. Two men shaking hands. Flags behind them. Bridges beneath their feet. Traoré knelt beside him and asked, "What's this?" The boy smiled shyly. "It's you and the other man. The one with gray hair." Traoré laughed softly. "He's not bad," the boy added. "He just didn't see the whole picture yet." Traoré looked down at the drawing. Two men. One old, one young. Not fighting, but standing together. He looked at Diallo. "The next summit won't be about defending ideas," he said. "It'll be about building them together, elsewhere across the continent." something began to shift. Other countries took notice. Talks of similar partnerships emerged. The idea of protecting internal resources while inviting fair trade began gaining traction. Slowly, subtly, the old model of dependency started to crack. Not because of a revolution, but because of a conversation. Back in his apartment, Chidi Okoro finished the last lines of his report. They stood on opposite ends of a vision. He wrote, "But they didn't tear the bridge down. They built one. Carefully. Painfully. Together." He hit publish, and the story began to travel. A final shot. Two leaders. Once rivals. Now, symbols. One seasoned by time. The other sharpened by resolve. Both finally seeing what the other saw. A continent not divided by vision, but strengthened by it. Weeks passed. But the impact of the Abuja summit kept growing. It was no longer just a headline, it had become a case study. Universities in Ghana hosted open forums discussing the bridge doctrine. Students in Sierra Leone debated the balance between sovereignty and globalization. Even business leaders in Kenya began exploring new models for equitable trade. And in Burkina Faso and Nigeria, the effects were more than symbolic. Joint announcements started rolling out plans for a cross-border tech training program, a renewable energy initiative, and shared agricultural research labs. For the first time in years, two nations, once walking separate paths, were now pulling the rope in the same direction. But the most powerful change, it wasn't on paper. It was in people's minds. In Abuja, Tinubu stood before a classroom of future diplomats, young men and women barely half his age. Eyes full of urgency. "You will inherit this continent," he told them. "And I hope you do so, with less ego and more listening." A student raised her hand. "Sir, what changed your mind at the summit?" Tinubu paused. "Seeing someone stand for something and not blink." He said, "That kind of clarity demands a response." Across the border, in a small radio station in Ouagadougou, Traoré was answering question, live on air. The host asked him, "What was the hardest part of the negotiation?" Traoré smiled. "Not the politics," he replied, "the silence. When you offer peace, and you don't know if they'll take it." But he did. The host said, "He did. Traoré no did." Meanwhile, Chidi Okoro's feature story had gone viral across the continent. His phrase, "They didn't trade punches, they traded perspective," had become a tagline for a new generation of thinkers. In one interview, he explained why he believed this moment struck so deeply. Because it wasn't about domination. He said, it was about dignity. But as attention grew, so did pressure. Some critics warned that the alliance was fragile, that big promises could fade once the cameras left. Others questioned whether idealism would survive when hard economics came knocking. Both Tinubu and Traoré knew the honeymoon wouldn't last. But they also knew the foundation had been poured. One afternoon, Traoré walked through a construction site on the outskirts of Bobo Dioulasso, one of the cities set to receive joint funding for a youth skills center. Workers in hard hats paused to greet him. He stopped beside a pile of bricks and asked, "Do you know what this is?" One worker laughed. "A brick, no." Traoré replied, "It's a vote. A vote for the future." In Lagos, Tinubu reviewed early reports on a vocational program modeled after Burkina Faso's rural training initiatives. It wasn't flashy, but the numbers were promising. Amina placed the folder on his desk and asked, "Still worth it?" Tinubu didn't look up. "Especially now." Across cities and borders, murals appeared, paintings of two hands, shaking across a map of West Africa. Bridges spanning valleys, once filled with doubt. Children took selfies in front of them. Artists called them the Vision Series. The Abuja summit had ended, but its spirit was just beginning. In a private moment, Traoré and Tinubu met again, this time without microphones, lights, or press, just two men on a rooftop, watching the city skyline glow against a violet dusk. "No speeches tonight," Traoré said, half joking. Tinubu smirked. "Good. I didn't bring notes." They stood there in silence for a while. Then Tinubu spoke. "You know, people think the hardest part is making the deal." "It's not," Traoré asked. "No," Tinubu said. "It's keeping it alive." Traoré nodded. "Then let's keep building." They didn't shake hands this time. They didn't need to, because what they had built was already standing, and beneath that quiet sky, with no audience, no applause, two generations looked at the same horizon and finally saw the same thing: a future worth fighting for together.